She was jilted on her wedding day, left standing at the altar with the weight of 1,000 judging eyes bearing down on her. And then her billionaire boss, a man as cold and imposing as the steel skyscrapers he commanded, leaned in and whispered, "Pretend I'm the groom. He's not coming." That single, audacious proposition silenced the room, a hush falling like a heavy curtain. Aurora stood there, a vision in a pristine white dress meant for a lifetime of love and commitment, while every whisper, every furtive glance felt like a dagger twisting in her heart. Humiliation burned like acid. Just when she thought she would crumble under the crushing weight of public shame, an unexpected savior emerged from the periphery, not to undo the damage already done, but to offer a lifeline into an uncertain future. In that surreal moment, her most devastating day began to transform, the narrative twisting in a way she never could have imagined. Before we delve further into this captivating tale, if you're drawn to stories that tug at your heartstrings and ignite your spirit, be sure to subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up. Now, let's immerse ourselves back into the unfolding drama. "You don't need to wait anymore," the wedding planner murmured, her voice trembling with a mixture of pity and disbelief. "He's not coming." The words, sharp and cruel, shattered the fragile silence like shards of broken glass, landing at Aurora Bennett's feet, just as the opulent train of her gown settled behind her. She remained frozen, unable to process the enormity of the abandonment. A wave of murmurs rippled through the assembled guests, whispers exchanged behind delicate, gloved fingers, the rustle of silk and taffeta as people shifted in their seats, a few bolder souls even daring to stand, their faces etched with confusion and morbid curiosity. The organist, mid-melody, fumbled a note before abruptly ceasing altogether, the music dying a premature death. The atmosphere in the room underwent a tangible shift, becoming heavier, hotter, thick with unspoken judgment. Aurora's heart wasn't beating. It was merely suspended, hanging precariously in her chest, desperately awaiting a miracle that seemed increasingly unlikely. Instead, all she could see was the desolate emptiness of the aisle stretching before her, an unbearable symbol of her shattered dreams. No groom, no reassuring footsteps, no loving smile to ease her mounting despair. Just row upon row of faces, all watching her with a blend of pity and morbid fascination, trapping her in a suffocating vortex of public scrutiny. One bridesmaid shifted uncomfortably, as if physically recoiling from the unfolding disaster. Another quietly took a step back, as if worried the humiliation might be contagious. Aurora's father, his face a mask of barely suppressed anguish, sat rigidly in the front row, his trembling hand covering his mouth in a futile attempt to contain his pain. Her sister Clara, fiercely protective as always, had already begun to rise from her seat, ready to rush to Aurora's side, but Aurora raised a single gloved hand, a silent plea for her to remain where she was. Don't let me fall. She felt her knees weaken, threatening to buckle beneath the weight of her despair. Her fingers instinctively sought the smooth, cool surface of the pearl drop earrings swinging gently against her neck, a tangible connection to her mother's enduring strength. Her mother's earrings, the only thing preventing her from completely dissolving into a puddle of humiliation right there and then. "These are for strength," her mother had said on her wedding day, her eyes twinkling with love. And for when you need to remember who you are. But in this moment, stripped bare of her expectations and dreams, Aurora didn't know who she was anymore. She had been publicly abandoned at the altar, exposed under the unforgiving glare of the lights, in front of 138 witnesses. Still, she refused to let her chin drop, refused to let her eyes betray the torrent of emotions raging within her. Not yet. Then, a subtle rustle broke the oppressive silence, not from the back of the room where her groom should have been making his grand entrance, but from the far left, where the event staff and last-minute guests lingered quietly by the wall. The rustle escalated into a hushed murmur, which then abruptly ceased as all eyes turned towards the source of the disturbance. Someone had begun to walk, their footsteps echoing with a resolute confidence that defied the palpable tension in the room. It was Damien Hale, the CEO, the enigmatic man who had built Hale and Crane from the ground up through sheer force of will. A man known for firing employees with a single glacial glance. A man who never attended weddings, especially not those of his junior staff. Aurora had seen him around the office for years, a distant, unreadable figure who exuded an aura of power and control. Yet, something about him had always made her pause, made her breath catch in her throat, even if she had never dared to admit it to herself. And now he was walking towards her, straight down the aisle, his gait slow, deliberate, unapologetically confident. The crowd stirred with renewed intensity. Some recognized him instantly, their eyes widening in surprise. Others whispered, "Isn't that her boss? What's he doing here? He wasn't even invited, was he?" He reached the front of the room and stopped just short of her veil, his presence radiating an almost palpable energy. His impeccably tailored suit looked as though it had been sculpted onto his body. His tie remained untouched by the imaginary winds of the swirling chaos. His expression was calm, unreadable, betraying nothing of his intentions. But there was something flickering in his eyes, a subtle nuance that didn't quite align with his usual detached demeanor, a crack in his carefully constructed facade. Then, in a voice so low that only she could hear it, he leaned in and whispered, "If you need someone to stand by you today, pretend I'm the groom." Aurora's breath hitched in her throat, not from the audacity of the offer, not yet, but from the undeniable sincerity in his tone. He was serious, not mocking, not driven by pity. He was offering her a lifeline, a shield against the crushing weight of her humiliation. Suddenly, the pearl earrings felt a little heavier, a little more significant. He reached out a hand, his fingers extended towards her in a silent invitation. Behind her, the whispers escalated into gasps of astonishment. In front of her, the man she had only ever known as precise, cold, and brilliantly untouchable was offering her a moment of reprieve, a chance to salvage something from the wreckage of her shattered dreams. Not just rescue from the immediate shame, but from the complete and utter disintegration of her carefully constructed world. She looked at his hand, strong, capable, a symbol of unwavering support in a world that had suddenly turned hostile. "You don't have to," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "I know," he replied, his gaze unwavering. "But I'm here." That was all. No grand speech, no dramatic declaration, just steady eyes and a hand that did not tremble. She took it. Gasps erupted from the audience. A camera clicked, capturing the surreal moment for posterity. Someone cried out, "Is this a joke?" but their voice was quickly silenced by a chorus of shushing. Damien stepped beside her, turned to face the stunned crowd, and addressed them with an authority that brooked no argument. "There's been a change of plan," he said simply, his voice resonating with quiet power. "But the bride remains the bride, and she deserves every ounce of respect you came here to give her." His voice effortlessly filled the space, commanding attention without needing to be raised. He didn't need to shout. His presence alone was enough. Aurora's fingers tightened around his, clinging to him as if he were the only solid object in a world that was rapidly dissolving around her. In the stunned silence, they stepped back together, away from the altar, away from the spotlight of public scrutiny. No kiss, no vows exchanged. Just the two of them standing side by side before the assembled guests. Not as lovers, not yet, but as allies, co-conspirators against the overwhelming force of public shame. And somehow, impossibly, it worked. Clara exhaled sharply in the front row, her shoulders visibly relaxing as she lowered herself back into her seat. Aurora's father wiped his eyes, not in sadness, but in something that bordered on relief. The wedding, or what was left of it, continued. No music, no celebratory toasts, but plates were served. Champagne flowed hesitantly, the bubbles mirroring the unease in the room. Guests didn't quite know what to say, so most opted to say nothing at all. Their conversations reduced to awkward whispers and forced smiles. Aurora and Damien sat at the sweetheart table in near silence, the space between them crackling with unspoken emotions, charged with the weight of what had transpired. She instinctively touched her earrings again, seeking solace in their familiar presence. "They suit you," he observed, his gaze lingering on the delicate pearls. "They were my mother's." "I know," that surprised her. "You do. I read the feature article you wrote last year for the charity gala," he said, picking up his knife with deliberate precision and cutting a clean piece of chicken. He then placed the knife back down on the table with an equally deliberate movement. The part about the earrings and the strength they represent. She blinked, taken aback. She never imagined he would have read something she had written, although she had always harbored a secret suspicion that he noticed far more than he let on. "You wrote it like someone who believes in things people can't see," he added quietly, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her heart skip a beat. A small, involuntary smile fought its way through the storm of emotions raging inside her. "I was raised to believe in things like that." He nodded once, a barely perceptible movement. "So was I." There it was, the first breath of fresh air in a suffocating atmosphere. A shared meal, a quiet sentence laden with unspoken weight, a micro-victory in the midst of utter chaos. But just as Aurora began to feel the faintest glimmer of control returning, someone approached their table, shattering the fragile peace. It was Callie Marine, a prominent socialite, a close friend of the runaway groom, and a longtime vocal critic of Aurora's small-town charm and perceived lack of sophistication. Callie had always craved Damien's attention, and harbored a deep-seated resentment towards anyone who managed to capture even a sliver of it. "Sorry to interrupt," she said, her voice dripping with saccharine sweetness, her eyes flicking back and forth between them with barely concealed malice. "But I just thought you should know. Someone posted a video of the whole thing. It's already gone viral. Over 100,000 views in the last hour." The blood drained from Aurora's face, leaving her skin ashen. Callie leaned in just close enough to deliver the killing blow. "They're calling you the stand-in bride. Cute, right?" And just like that, the second wave of humiliation crashed over her, threatening to drown her completely. Damien's jaw tightened, the muscle flexing beneath his skin. His chair shifted slightly, a subtle indication of his barely suppressed anger. "Let it go," Aurora said softly, her eyes still locked on Callie's, refusing to give her the satisfaction of seeing her crumble. She just came to feel better about herself. Callie laughed, a brittle, artificial sound. "Oh darling, I already do." Then she turned and sauntered away, leaving a trail of poison in her wake. Damien didn't speak immediately, allowing the silence to settle between them, thick with unspoken tension. When he finally did speak, his words were slow, deliberate, each syllable carefully enunciated. "We need to control the narrative," he stated, his voice devoid of emotion. "And I don't do half measures." Aurora turned to him, her eyes wide with apprehension. "What does that mean?" He looked directly at her, his gaze unwavering. "It means we're not pretending anymore." Aurora's fingers gripped the edge of her plate so tightly that her knuckles turned white, as if it were the only solid thing left in her collapsing world. The clinking of cutlery, the murmur of half-hearted conversations, and the awkward glances of the other guests swirled around her like a thick, impenetrable fog. She felt like she was trapped in the eye of a hurricane, dressed in lace and satin. A forced smile plastered on her lips, desperately trying to maintain her composure while her world flipped upside down in front of 138 people and counting. Across the sweetheart table, Damien Hale sat as if this entire surreal scenario had been meticulously planned, as if he had been destined to occupy the seat all along. He hadn't left, hadn't wavered, not when the whispers turned cruel, not when the video of her public humiliation started circulating with captions like, "Runaway groom drama, CO steps in." She leaned in just slightly, her voice barely a whisper, ensuring that only he could hear her. "You really want to do this?" Her voice was fragile, but surprisingly steady, betraying the turmoil raging within her. "Because if this is some kind of damage control or..." "It's not," he interrupted, his tone quiet but firm, brooking no argument. A waiter approached, clearly young and utterly terrified of interrupting, holding out a tray of hors d'oeuvres with trembling hands. Canopy brie with truffle honey?" Damien picked one with slow, deliberate precision, examining it as if it held the key to unlocking the universe. Aurora shook her head, declining the offering. The waiter hovered for a moment too long, then scurried away, nearly tipping the tray into an elaborate flower arrangement. Somewhere behind them, a guest let out a nervous laugh, quickly smothered by their table partner. Damien didn't flinch, didn't even acknowledge the interruption. He simply turned his full attention back to her, his gaze intense and unwavering. His voice was so low that it felt like it belonged in a different world, a world far removed from the one that was currently falling apart around them. "Pity," he said, "is silent. What I'm offering is loud." Aurora swallowed hard, her throat suddenly dry. Somewhere deep down, a part of her wondered if he had always been this attentive, this perceptive, and she had simply been too preoccupied or too afraid to notice. That thought made her look up, really look at him, for the first time that day. He wasn't smiling, he rarely did. but his expression had softened, not warm exactly, but honest and steady. A stark contrast to the cold, calculating facade he usually presented to the world. "You're offering a scandal," she said, a trace of bitterness coloring her voice. "I'm offering cover," he replied, his gaze unflinching. "There's a difference." Aurora blinked, uncertain whether to laugh or cry. "And what do you get out of this reputation?" He answered without hesitation. "Mine and yours." She looked down, realizing that her hands were still curled tightly around the base of her champagne glass, her knuckles white with tension. Inside, the pale liquid shimmered under the soft lighting, and something glinted beneath the surface. One of her pearl drop earrings had slipped loose and fallen into the glass without her noticing. She stared at it, suspended there like a drowned secret, a symbol of her shattered dreams. When she looked up, she caught Damien glancing at it, too. He didn't comment, didn't offer any platitudes or false reassurances, just acknowledged it with a brief, knowing look, as if he understood the weight of its symbolism, as if he understood what it meant to her. "It's already gone viral," she said finally, stating the obvious. "Callie made sure I knew. She practically danced over to tell me." "She always did have impeccable timing," Damien said flatly, a hint of something that might have been amusement flickering in his eyes. Aurora raised an eyebrow, surprised by his comment. "You know her?" "Unfortunately," he said, his tone laced with a subtle distaste. "She was once married to my cousin." "She was married?" "For about 12 minutes. A small laugh escaped her before she could stop it. A sound quick, startled, real, and perhaps the first genuine expression she had displayed all day. Damien noticed, and though his expression didn't change, his shoulders eased almost imperceptibly, as if her laugh had somehow released some of the tension that had been gripping him. "So," he said, pausing for a moment, allowing the weight of his words to settle in the air between them. "Here's the choice." Aurora sat straighter, bracing herself for what was to come. "We can walk out of here separately," he continued, his voice calm and measured. "You'll deal with the questions, the whispers, the pity, and I'll let my PR team handle the chaos." "Or," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Or," he said simply, his eyes locked on hers, offering her a lifeline in the storm. "I'll take your hand. We walk out together publicly. I give them a version of the story they won't be able to chew apart. I make a statement to the press, and until this dies down or until it doesn't, we play this as if it were planned." Her chest tightened, constricting her breath. "You mean, pretend we're engaged?" He didn't blink, didn't flinch, didn't offer any false promises. "I mean, pretend you chose me." That landed harder than she expected, hitting her with the force of a physical blow. There was no flirtation in his voice, no ego, just the stark reality of the decision and the strange, fragile truth that lay beneath it. "Why would you want that?" she asked again, her voice quieter now, laced with a hint of vulnerability. Damien's jaw shifted, a telltale sign of the internal struggle he was waging. "Because I don't like bullies. Because this," he nodded at the room, encompassing the entire spectacle of her public humiliation, "was cruel. And because when a man runs away from a woman like you, someone has to make it clear that it's his loss." Silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken emotions and the weight of the decision that hung in the balance. Aurora reached for the champagne glass, gently fishing the errant earring out and holding it in the palm of her hand. The pearl was wet, shimmering in the light, a tangible reminder of everything she had lost and everything she still had to gain. Her mother's words came back to her, faint but fierce, echoing in the depths of her memory. These are for strength. And somehow, in this impossible moment, strength didn't feel like standing alone, facing the world's judgment with stoic resignation. It felt like having someone beside her, someone willing to share the burden, even if just for now. She took a slow, deliberate breath, steeling her resolve. "All right." Damien looked at her, his eyes searching hers, seeking confirmation. "All right," she said, her voice firm and unwavering, her eyes locking with his. "Let's give them a show." He stood first, the simple motion instantly drawing attention to them. Chairs creaked, forks paused mid-air, conversations abruptly ceased. Callie turned fully in her seat, her mouth already curled into a smug smirk, anticipating Aurora's imminent downfall. But the smirk faltered, dissolving into a mixture of confusion and disbelief when she saw Aurora rising, graceful and composed, her hand clasped firmly in Damien's. Together, they moved through the room, past the awkward glances, the half-hearted congratulations, the barely concealed pity. Aurora held her chin high, her pearl earrings back in place, the train of her gown trailing behind her like a banner of defiance. As they approached the double doors that led to the outside world, the relentless flash of cameras began to pop, illuminating their faces in a blinding strobe. Damien didn't release her hand, didn't waver, didn't betray any sign of the turmoil that must have been brewing within him. Then, right at the entrance, he leaned towards her, his voice velvet smooth and dangerously clear, ensuring that his words would be captured by the microphones and broadcast to the world. "I'll say we've been together secretly," he murmured, his breath warm against her ear. "That you didn't want to outshine the groom, that he found out and left in a jealous rage." Aurora stared at him, stunned by the sheer audacity of his plan. "You're kidding." He gave the smallest hint of a smile, a fleeting expression that barely registered on his face. "Tell me that's not exactly what they want to believe." And somehow, impossibly, she found herself smiling too, a genuine smile that reached her eyes for the first time that day. But just as they stepped into the glare of the cameras, ready to face the world together, a voice rang out from behind them, loud, breathless, and filled with a desperate plea. "Aurora, wait." She turned and froze, her heart plummeting to her stomach. It was Nathan, the runaway groom, back in his tuxedo, his hair disheveled, his eyes wide with panic and remorse. "I made a mistake," he said, stumbling towards them. "I'm here. I'm ready." The crowd gasped, their collective breath catching in their throats. The carefully constructed illusion they had so painstakingly created threatened to shatter into a million pieces. Damien didn't flinch, didn't betray any sign of surprise or concern. He simply stood beside her, a silent sentinel, his presence a tangible shield against the chaos that was about to erupt. Aurora's heart stopped beating. "Aurora, wait." The voice rang out like thunder cracking through a cloudless sky, shattering the fragile sense of control she had managed to regain. She turned slowly, her gaze drawn to the figure standing at the far end of the aisle. Nathan, her fiancé, the man who had vanished without a word, without a text, without the common decency of a goodbye, stood there, disheveled and breathless, as if he had run all the way back from whatever coward's hiding place he had disappeared to. His tux jacket was open, his bow tie hanging askew, the meticulously styled hair he had spent hours perfecting now a tangled mess, a testament to his frantic journey back. I made a mistake, he said again, his voice louder this time, laced with desperation as he took another tentative step forward. I panicked, but I'm here. I'm ready. I still want to marry you. The room fell into the kind of silence that holds its breath and waits for the inevitable explosion. Aurora didn't blink, didn't move, didn't betray any sign of the emotional turmoil raging within her. Her hand remained firmly clasped in Damien's, steady, warm, and reassuring. Nathan looked at Damien as if he had just realized he wasn't alone in this bizarre tableau, as if he had just registered the presence of another man standing between him and his bride. Who is he? What's he doing here? Damien raised an eyebrow, a subtle gesture that conveyed more than words ever could. The CEO didn't need to shout, didn't need to engage in a petty argument. His presence alone was enough to cut someone down to size. Aurora's throat burned with unshed tears, a mixture of anger, hurt, and a profound sense of betrayal. I waited for you, she said quietly, her voice carrying through the hushed silence. I was 5 minutes away, Nathan said, his voice pleading, as he took another step closer. I got overwhelmed. Everyone was watching. Your dad, the vows, the cameras, the expectations. I thought maybe I couldn't be who you needed me to be, but I can. I want to be. She looked at him, really looked at him, and what she saw was not the man she had fallen in love with, the man she had envisioned spending the rest of her life with. She saw a stranger, a man who had revealed his true colors under pressure, a man who wanted to be forgiven without having to earn it. Behind her, someone stepped on a loose pile of flower petals and slipped, gasping loudly, grabbing onto a tablecloth and nearly taking an entire champagne tower with them in their clumsy descent. A waiter dove heroically, managing to save the top glass, and then stood red-faced and apologetic as a soft wave of nervous laughter broke through the oppressive tension in the room. Aurora smiled briefly, acknowledging the unintentional comic relief, then turned back to Nathan, her expression hardening. Her pearl earring glinted in the light as she tilted her head, a small but powerful reminder of her own strength and resilience. You know what hurts more than being left at the altar? She said, her voice steady and unwavering, betraying none of the emotional turmoil churning within her, being treated like an afterthought. Nathan paled, the color draining from his face as he realized the gravity of his mistake. She took a step forward, not towards him, but beside Damien, her body angled away from Nathan now, subtly protected by the man who had chosen to show up when it mattered most. You don't get to run away from the hardest moment of my life, she continued, her voice ringing with newfound confidence. And come back because you're scared of what people will say. Aurora, I made a mistake, Nathan protested, his voice rising in desperation. No, Nathan, she said, cutting him off with a dismissive wave of her hand. You made a choice, and so will I. She turned to Damien, her eyes sparkling with quiet boldness. Still want to be my fake fiancé? She asked, a hint of a challenge in her voice. Damien's eyes flicked to Nathan, then back to her, his expression unreadable. And for the first time that day, the faintest glimmer of a smile touched his lips, a subtle curve that transformed his entire face. No, he said, his voice low and resonant, sending a shiver down her spine. I want to be whatever you need me to be. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone dropped a glass, the shattering sound echoing through the stunned silence. Nathan's expression hardened, his eyes narrowing with resentment and disbelief. This is ridiculous. You don't even know him. I've worked for him for 4 years, Aurora retorted, her voice laced with steel. And in one moment he showed more character than you ever have. The words weren't shouted, weren't delivered with histrionics. They didn't need to be. They landed like stones in still water, creating ripples that spread throughout the room, leaving no one untouched. Aurora reached down, lifted the train of her gown slightly, and walked back towards the doors, her hand still firmly clasped in Damien's, her head held high, her back straight, her spirit unbowed. Outside, the press lights flashed, illuminating their faces in a blinding glare. The air was cold, sharp with the bite of the December wind, but her heart was strangely warm, not with revenge, not even with pride, but with the quiet sense of calm that comes from speaking your truth out loud. Damien guided her gently down the stairs, his hand a reassuring presence at her elbow. How do you feel? He asked, his voice laced with a hint of concern. She exhaled, letting out a breath she hadn't realized she had been holding. Like I'm finally not pretending. The car door opened, and he held it for her, a small gesture of consideration that spoke volumes about his character. As she sat, she caught her reflection in the glass, her veil slightly loose, her cheeks flushed with adrenaline, but her eyes steady, resolute and strangely at peace. And beside her stood Damien Hale, impeccable, unreadable, and oddly kind. A man who had stepped out of the shadows and into her life when she needed him most. As the car pulled away from the curb, her phone buzzed, signaling the arrival of a new message. It was from her father, a message that cut through the noise and chaos and touched her heart in a way nothing else could. You were brilliant today, he wrote, his words simple but profound. Your mother would be proud. Come home when you're ready. We saved you cake. Tears pricked her eyes, but this time they didn't sting with humiliation or despair. They healed, washing away the residue of pain and leaving behind a sense of hope and possibility. She looked at Damien, who sat quietly watching the road ahead, his expression unreadable. Thank you, she said softly, her voice filled with genuine gratitude. For what? He asked, turning to face her, his eyes searching hers. For not letting me fall alone. He turned back to the road, his jaw tightening slightly. That's not something you'll ever have to worry about again. But before she could reply, her phone buzzed once more, signaling the arrival of another message. This time from an unknown number. You're trending worldwide. You and the CEO. Congratulations? Oh, or should I say, condolences? Aurora stared at the message, her stomach twisting into a knot. She turned the screen towards Damien, silently asking for his assessment of the situation. He read it once, his expression remaining impassive, then said, Time to make this official. The black car slid through the wrought iron gates of Hale Tower, sleek and silent as a closing secret, disappearing from the prying eyes of the outside world. Aurora had never sat in the back of Damien's personal town car before. She wasn't even sure most people in the company knew it existed. It was the kind of vehicle you only noticed if you were allowed to, a symbol of exclusivity and power. Discreet, expensive, quiet, much like Damien himself. She watched the city lights blur past through the tinted window, still glowing brightly despite the late hour. Her veil fluttered faintly in the breeze coming from the cracked window, a fragile reminder of the day's events. Her phone buzzed again, but she resisted the urge to check it, knowing that it would only contain more of the same. Judgment, speculation, and thinly veiled mockery. Is your inbox still exploding? Damien asked from beside her, his gaze fixed on his own phone, his fingers moving swiftly across the screen. She gave a dry, humorless laugh. I stopped counting after the 27th. Are you okay? Followed by a screenshot of my own face. He finally looked over at her, his eyes searching hers. They'll lose interest, he said, his voice flat. They always do. She hesitated, knowing that what he said was only partially true. But I work in PR, Damien. You and I both know they only move on if we give them something bigger to chase. His gaze didn't waver, didn't betray any sign of discomfort. Exactly. That one word sat in the air between them, heavy with implication, laden with unspoken promises and carefully calculated risks. Aurora tilted her head, studying his expression, trying to decipher the meaning behind his words. So when you said, make it official, what exactly did you mean? He adjusted his cuff, a subtle habit she had often observed in boardrooms whenever he was about to say something particularly strategic or calculated. I mean, we lean into it, he said, his voice measured, his words precise. I make a public statement. You move into the apartment above my office. It's mostly empty. We appear together a few times in controlled settings. Let the world write their fairy tale. She blinked, trying to process the sheer audacity of his proposal. You want to pretend we're engaged? He nodded once, his gaze unwavering. Temporarily, until the headlines change. And then we end it with dignity, he said, his voice softening slightly. A quiet, mutual statement. No one's reputation suffers. You don't get remembered as the girl left at the altar. And I don't get remembered as the man who watched it happen and did nothing. It made sense, she had to admit. Painfully strategic, undeniably smart, incredibly effective, but still. You've thought this through, she observed, unable to keep the surprise out of her voice. I've had 27 minutes of silence, he replied, a hint of amusement flickering in his eyes. That's a lifetime in my world. Aurora exhaled slowly, her fingers unconsciously brushing against the pearl earrings once more, seeking comfort in their familiar presence. She reached up, beginning to remove one, but stopped, her hand hovering in midair. The cool weight of it on her earlobe reminded her that she wasn't broken, just bruised. I don't want to lie, she said quietly, her voice laced with uncertainty. You won't? Damien replied, his gaze meeting hers with unwavering intensity. Not really. She looked over at him, skeptical, unsure of what he meant. We're not pretending you loved me, he clarified, his words cutting through the confusion and striking at the heart of the matter. We're pretending you didn't deserve what happened. Those words. They resonated with her on a level she hadn't anticipated. She swallowed hard, unable to deny the truth in them, because he was right. That was the heart of it, the core of her pain, the injustice of it all. The car pulled up in front of a brownstone with clean lines, ivy-covered windows, and a private elevator, a symbol of wealth and understated elegance. Damien stepped out first and offered her his hand without hesitation, not out of politeness or social obligation, but as if it was the most natural thing in the world between them now, as if their alliance had somehow transcended the artificiality of their arrangement. She took it, her fingers intertwining with his, feeling a surprising surge of comfort and reassurance. The doorman greeted them both with a polite nod, his eyes widening slightly as he took in the scene before him. Good evening, Mr. Hale, Miss Bennett. Aurora's heart thumped in her chest, a mixture of anxiety and anticipation. The name still felt fragile, unfamiliar on his lips, a stark reminder of the life she had lost and the uncertain future that lay ahead. Evening, Damon said simply, guiding her inside, his hand never leaving hers. The elevator ride was smooth and quiet, the silence broken only by the soft hum of the machinery, but her pulse wasn't nearly as calm. It hammered in her ears, a frantic rhythm that echoed the turmoil raging within her. The penthouse apartment was everything she had imagined and more. Sleek, modern, and impeccably furnished, but strangely devoid of personal touches, lacking the warmth and character that transformed a house into a home. Not a single personal photo in sight, no knickknacks or souvenirs to betray the personality of the occupant. Just minimalist art, expensive furniture, and a pervasive sense of sterile perfection. Warm light poured from sleek overhead panels, illuminating the space with a soft, even glow. A tall vase of fresh eucalyptus stood by the window like a silent guest, filling the air with its invigorating scent. Damien gestured towards the open-plan kitchen, his movements economical and efficient. You hungry? She blinked, startled by the unexpected question. You cook? No, he said, his expression unwavering. But I have a few emergency meals delivered weekly, mostly for guests. She raised an eyebrow, unable to resist the urge to tease him. You have guests? He didn't answer, didn't elaborate, just opened the refrigerator and pulled out a small, prepackaged container labeled vegetable stew, rosemary flatbread on the side. Comfort food, he explained, his voice devoid of emotion. My assistant's idea. You mean Eleanor? Aurora asked, a hint of amusement in her voice. She likes me, she added softly, remembering Eleanor's unwavering support and genuine kindness. She likes anyone who survives working with me for more than a year, Damien retorted, a flicker of something that might have been self-deprecating humor in his eyes. A laugh bubbled out of her, genuine this time, a spontaneous expression of relief and amusement that surprised even her. She accepted the warmed bowl a few minutes later and sat across from him at the island counter, the silence between them no longer strained, but almost comfortable. The flatbread was soft, slightly crisp at the edges, infused with the subtle aroma of rosemary. It was somehow exactly what she didn't know she needed, a small comfort in the midst of chaos. He watched her carefully as she ate, his gaze intense and unwavering, as if he were trying to decipher the secrets hidden within her soul. You okay? He asked again, his voice softer this time, betraying a hint of genuine concern. I think so, she said, chewing thoughtfully, allowing the warmth of the stew to soothe her frayed nerves. You? He had always seemed so cold and distant at work, so untouchable, so completely in control. But tonight, she saw something else, a vulnerability, a flicker of humanity that she had never noticed before. Or maybe, if she was honest with herself, she had sensed that softness long before, had fall in love, truly, madly, deeply, or, darling, fake it with such breathtaking artistry that the world believes it, she declared, a mischievous glint in her eye. Either way, live it to the hilt. With a flourish, she turned on her heel, leaving behind a lingering whisper of cinnamon and roses, a scent that clung to the air long after she was gone. Damien blinked, momentarily stunned. That was magical, Aurora breathed, a genuine smile gracing her lips. They exchanged a look, and for a fleeting moment, the elaborate charade they were constructing seemed to dissolve, leaving something raw and real in its place. Aurora perched on the edge of the enormous bed, the crisp linen cool against her skin. She still wore her silk robe, the pearl drop earrings, her mother's, lay discarded on the nightstand. She had long since washed away the remnants of last night's meticulously applied makeup, shedding the heavy gown and the weight of expectations with it. The quiet of the room had seeped into her soul, softening the edges of the emotional storm that had raged within her. It was morning, a true morning, and despite the personal earthquake that had shattered her world, the earth had continued its rotation. The sky was a muted gray, the overcast light filtering through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of Damon Hale's guest suite like a melancholic watercolor painting. Somewhere below, the city throbbed with life, and the internet, that ever-watchful beast, stirred with renewed vigor. She flipped her phone face down, silencing the insistent buzz that had plagued her every 5 minutes. Asterisk runaway bride, Damon Hale, secret fiancé. Jilted ex holds head high with billionaire by her side. Pearls, power and PR. The wedding that wasn't. Asterisk her life had become a tabloid headline, a spectacle for public consumption. And today she had to address the masses. She had to spin. A gentle knock echoed through the room. Damien entered halfway, a figure of polished composure in a perfectly tailored suit, bearing a peace offering in the form of a steaming cup of coffee. I come bearing peace, he announced, extending the mug. A tired smile flickered across her face. Do you deliver sarcasm with caffeine, or is that an extra charge? He tilted his head, a hint of amusement in his eyes. Sarcasm is included. Cream is optional. She accepted the cup, her warm fingers brushing against his. Thank you. He lingered, his gaze sweeping over her face, a silent assessment of her well-being. Did you sleep? He asked, his voice soft. A little. Nightmares? She hesitated, then gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. People laughing. Doors closing. My dad, looking disappointed. He's not, Damien said, his tone firm. She blinked, surprised. You spoke to him last night? He nodded. He called. Said he trusted you. Told me not to mess it up. Aurora looked down, her smile faltering, emotions threatening to overwhelm her. He said that? Damien nodded, his expression unreadable. Wow. She looked back up, a watery smile playing on her lips. That's his version of a shotgun. He almost smiled, a ghost of amusement flitting across his features. Then, more seriously, the studio's ready. The interviewer is someone I trust. No gotcha questions. Just your version of the story. She placed the mug on the nightstand, the scent of coffee suddenly cloying. Do I have to be soft? Damien stepped closer, his presence a comforting weight in the room. You don't owe them pretty, just honest. His words settled over her like a protective armor. She reached for her earrings, paused, then clipped them in. Strength, dignity. She could almost feel her mother's serene presence radiating from them. Downstairs, a team of stylists waited, ready to transform her into a picture of resilient grace. A fitted ivory blouse, tailored navy trousers, heels that felt like a challenge, light makeup, hair softly pinned back, artfully showcasing the earrings. The look was carefully crafted, a statement. Asterisk not broken, not hiding. Still me, a young assistant, barely out of her teens, approached with a clipboard and wide, admiring eyes. You look like someone who wins. Aurora blinked, taken aback. You've never seen me try to find my car keys. They laughed, a moment of genuine connection amidst the manufactured drama. Sorry, the girl added shyly. You were just my favorite story growing up. The girl from the newsletter team who got promoted to global PR director. I always thought if she can do it, maybe I can too. Aurora froze, genuinely touched. She offered a soft, heartfelt smile. Thank you. That means more than you know. In the hallway, Damien waited, a silent sentinel. He offered his arm, and this time she took it without hesitation. They walked into the studio together, a united front. The lights were soft, flattering, the cameras already rolling. A warm-toned woman in her 50s, her face etched with laugh lines and the wisdom of experience, greeted them with a gentle smile. Men met Mr. Hale, she said. We'll keep this respectful. Aurora nodded, her voice firm. Good, because I'm done with games. The interview began, a carefully choreographed dance of truth and carefully curated image. First, the light questions. How they met, what drew them together, what kind of coffee they each preferred. Aurora laughed softly as she answered, because the truth was, she had noticed him long before she ever imagined standing beside him on a stage like this. Damien was dryly honest. Black, always. She adds too much cinnamon. Aurora grinned, playfully. And he never says thank you until the second sip. Laughter. Real, comfortable, easing the tension before the harder questions came. What did it feel like, Aurora, in that moment to be left standing there? Her hands folded gently in her lap, a picture of composure. It felt like the world paused, just long enough for everyone to see me break. But I didn't. Not all the way. And what do the earrings mean? Damien glanced at her, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. Aurora smiled faintly. They were my mother's. She used to say they were for strength. I almost took them off yesterday. I didn't. I needed the reminder. And Mr. Hale, the interviewer asked, her tone shifting. What made you step forward when no one else did? Damien looked directly into the camera, for once not rehearsed, not calculated. Because when someone's at their lowest, he said, his voice resonating with sincerity. You either walk away, or you stand beside them. I stood. It was simple. And it said everything. The interview wrapped. The team clapped, a collective exhalation of relief. Aurora exhaled, feeling lighter, almost buoyant. They stepped into the hallway again, a little stunned by how smoothly it had gone. And then, ding, the elevator doors slid open. Inside stood Callie Morin, draped head to toe in designer black, sunglasses shielding her eyes even indoors. That signature tilt of her chin a clear declaration. I smell drama. Well, she purred, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Look who's suddenly media royalty. Aurora straightened her shoulders. Darling, Callie said, removing her glasses with a dramatic flourish. I saw the interview. Very heartfelt. Very branded. Damien's eyes narrowed, his gaze hardening. Callie turned to him, her smile sharp. It's adorable how you've gone all night in shining Armani. But tell me, do you really think the board will believe this little storybook romance? Damien didn't flinch, his expression unwavering. I don't care what they believe. I care what she believes. Callie's smile thinned, her eyes glinting with malice. Oh, Damien, since when did you start playing with glass? Aurora stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. You mean women? Callie turned to face her, her smile a sneer. Aurora returned the look with a calm smile. We don't break that easily. You'd know that if you'd ever been one. A beat of silence. The air thick with unspoken animosity. The elevator chimed again, signaling its arrival. Callie swept inside, tight-lipped, sunglasses back in place. As the doors closed, she delivered one last, venomous barb. Just remember, sweetheart, fairy tales fall apart the minute real life shows up. The doors shut, severing the connection. Aurora turned to Damien, a thoughtful frown creasing her brow. I hate to say it, she admitted, but she has a point. He raised an eyebrow, his gaze questioning. About which part? Fairy tales? Damien stepped closer, his presence a comforting force. Then let's rewrite one. She stared at him, her heart pounding in her chest. His voice was quiet, but steady, resolute. Come with me to the charity gala next week. As my fiancé. Her breath caught in her throat. You're serious? He nodded, his eyes locked on hers. The guest list is already public. They'll expect us. Let them see us. She hesitated, weighing the implications, the potential pitfalls. But deep down she already knew her answer. I don't do galas. The words tumbled out before she could fully process them. A reflexive protest. Aurora stood by the tall window of Damien's penthouse, arms crossed loosely over her chest, the sky behind her ablaze with the fiery hues of sunset. Damien didn't react, not visibly. He simply turned from the small espresso machine, stirring sugar into his coffee with a rhythm that seemed almost too calm for the kind of pressure mounting around them. I figured you might say that, he said, his voice even. She turned slightly, her eyes narrowed. Then why ask? Because you deserve to be seen, he replied, his gaze direct and unwavering. Not just pitted, not just gossiped about. She didn't respond, not right away. It had only been 2 days since the altar, 2 days since her life had been irrevocably altered. The pearl earrings were still on her nightstand, a silent reminder of her mother's strength. Her dress was boxed up, sealed, and banished from sight, a tangible symbol of a dream that had dissolved into dust. But the moment, the humiliation, the whispers, the cameras still followed her like a persistent shadow. Everyone's watching, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Exactly. Damien sipped his coffee, unfazed. So, let's make sure they see the right version of you. Aurora narrowed her eyes, searching his face for any hint of ulterior motive. And what version is that? He paused, his gaze intense. The one you choose. Her stomach flipped, a mix of apprehension and anticipation swirling within her. He set his cup down and handed her a card. Elegant, cream-colored, heavy in her hand. * Hale Foundation Winter Gala. Black tie. Guest of honor, Damon Hale. Fiancée, Ms. Aurora Bennett. Her name was already printed, etched in elegant script. He had prepared, anticipated but not pressured. Somehow that made all the difference. I don't have a dress, she said softly, her voice betraying her vulnerability. His eyes met hers, his gaze unwavering. Then let's fix that. They arrived at the boutique just after noon, seeking refuge from the prying eyes of the city. Tucked into a quiet corner of Tribeca, the storefront bore no ostentatious sign, just frosted windows, rich wood trim, and a bell that chimed like it belonged in a bygone era, a 1940s film. Inside, it smelled of lavender and pressed silk, a sanctuary of elegance and refinement. Aurora followed Damien through the door, feeling oddly like Cinderella, dragged into a dream she wasn't sure she belonged in. The boutique manager, slim, impeccably dressed, and just theatrical enough to be charming, stepped forward, his face beaming with delight. Mr. Hale, he greeted, his voice a melodious purr. And this must be the Aurora. She gave a nervous smile, her cheeks flushed. The one and only. Oh, I hope not. The manager grinned, his eyes twinkling. But for today, yes. Damien's phone buzzed, shattering the illusion of serenity. I'll be right outside, he murmured, his voice low, stepping away to take the call. Aurora stood in front of a wall of gowns, a dazzling array of colors, textures, and designs. She felt lost, overwhelmed, unsure where to even begin. She reached for a soft ivory gown, simple and structured, a safe choice. No, the manager said gently, steering her away with a delicate hand. That one says, I'll behave. You're not here to behave. She laughed, a touch of self-deprecation in her voice. What am I here to do then? Remind the room that grace is louder than scandal. One by one, the gowns began to appear, a whirlwind of fabric and fantasy. Deep emerald, soft blush, navy velvet, shimmering gold silk. She tried on 3 then, for each one more beautiful than the last. But none of them felt quite right, none of them felt like her. And then, the manager wheeled out a large ornate box, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. It arrived this morning, from someone at your father's address. Aurora blinked, surprised. My father? She opened the lid, her fingers trembling slightly. Inside, nestled in layers of soft tissue paper, was her mother's gala gown. Cream satin, a fitted bodice that emphasized her curves, a flowing skirt that whispered with every movement, timeless and elegant. Her mother had worn it once, years ago, to a museum benefit, a night captured in a handful of cherished photographs, and tucked inside the box, nestled beside the gown, was her vintage clutch. Pearl beaded, worn at the edges, it smelled faintly of rose water and lemon, a scent that transported her back to childhood. She held the clutch against her chest, her eyes stinging with unshed tears. "I'll try it on," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. When she stepped out of the dressing room, the room went silent. Even Damien, who had returned from his call and was mid-sentence, froze as he turned, his eyes sweeping over her, not possessively, not even protectively, but like he was seeing something he hadn't expected, something he hadn't realized he'd been waiting for. Aurora lifted her chin, her gaze steady. "Well, you don't look like a woman who was left at the altar," the manager said, his voice hushed with awe. "What do I look like?" she asked, a half-smile playing on her lips. The manager tilted his head, his eyes filled with admiration. "Like the ending everyone underestimated." Damien said nothing, his gaze fixed on her. But when Aurora turned, she caught his reflection in the mirror, watching her, and she knew he wasn't pretending. There was genuine admiration in his eyes, a spark of something unexpected. That evening, as they walked through the lobby of Hale Tower, arm in arm, a united front against the world, an older woman near the elevator gave them a thorough once-over. "You too," she said, nodding at their formal wear, a knowing twinkle in her eye. "You're either headed to a gala or to ruin someone's week." Aurora smiled, a touch of defiance in her eyes. "Hopefully just the first one." The woman winked, a silent gesture of solidarity. "Make sure they know it." As the elevator doors closed, shutting out the curious gazes, Aurora looked at Damien, a question forming in her mind. "I haven't asked something." He waited patiently, his expression unreadable. "Why does this gala matter so much? Why not just keep our heads down, weather the storm in private?" He was quiet for a long moment, gathering his thoughts. "My mother ran that foundation," he said finally, his voice tinged with a hint of bitterness. "Before the board pushed her out." Aurora blinked, surprised by this revelation. "I didn't know." "She built it," he continued, his voice gaining intensity. "Every art program, every scholarship. Then she got too ambitious, too bold. And the men in suits started whispering, undermining her at every turn. And this gala? It's the one night they can't ignore her name," he said, his voice filled with a quiet determination. "Or mine. And you want to show up with me? Knowing the kind of attention it will bring?" He met her eyes, his gaze unwavering. "I want to walk in with someone who knows what it means to be underestimated. Someone who has stared adversity in the face and refused to blink." Aurora nodded slowly, understanding dawning in her eyes. "I know that feeling well." The car arrived, its polished surface gleaming under the city lights. The cameras waited, their lenses like hungry eyes, eager to devour their story. The gala shimmered ahead of them, a castle made of glass and judgment, a battlefield of expectations and unspoken rules. Aurora gripped her mother's clutch with one hand, finding strength in its familiar weight. Damien offered the other, his hand outstretched, a silent invitation. She took it, her fingers interlacing with his, and as the first flash went off, blindingly bright, she whispered to him, a defiant spark in her eyes. "Let them talk." He smiled, a hint of steel in his gaze. "They already are." The ballroom glowed like something out of a dream, a scene plucked from a classic Hollywood film. Crystal chandeliers sparkled, casting a warm, flattering light over the room. Velvet drapes cascaded from the high ceilings, adding a touch of old-world glamour. Silver-edged flutes of champagne, filled with effervescent bubbles, were carried on mirrored trays, reflecting the dazzling scene. Everything shimmered, including the grand staircase, which seemed to beckon them into the heart of the spectacle. Aurora Bennett had walked into plenty of rooms before, navigated countless social gatherings, but never one that judged this hard, this fast, and this quietly. The air thrummed with unspoken expectations, subtle assessments, and veiled judgments. Damien, by contrast, looked as if he had been carved from certainty. In a sleek black tuxedo, the cut perfect, the lines sharp, and a crisp white shirt, he walked beside her with a kind of elegant indifference, a quiet authority that made people step aside without being asked. His fingers rested lightly over hers as they approached the main floor, but he didn't miss the subtle tension in her jaw, or the way her fingers squeezed her mother's pearl-beaded clutch just a little too tight. "Nervous?" he murmured, his voice low and reassuring. "I don't know," she replied, her voice barely audible above the murmur of the crowd. "I think my stomach left the car before I did." He leaned in slightly, his breath warm against her ear. "There's no wrong way to be in this room. They just want to see if you flinch." Aurora smiled, a defiant glint in her eyes. "Then I won't." But inside, her thoughts were doing cartwheels, a chaotic jumble of anxieties and insecurities. They passed couples whose gowns could pay off mortgages, men with perfectly graying temples, and women whose smiles were as sharp and dazzling as diamonds. Everyone seemed to know everything, everyone seemed to belong, and everyone seemed to know her, to have an opinion about her, to be watching her every move. "There she is. Is that the one from the... I heard he flew her to Paris after the scandal." The whispers brushed past her like a cold wind, chilling her to the bone. She kept walking, her chin lifted, her eyes fixed forward, determined not to betray her inner turmoil. Then, from across the room, a woman approached, her path direct and purposeful. Tall, blonde, polished to perfection, probably in her late 40s, the kind of expensive that didn't need labels to announce its worth. Celeste Ulrich, board chair, philanthropist, and Damien's most persistent and vocal critic. "Well?" Celeste said smoothly, her voice dripping with false pleasantry, looking Aurora over like a painting she didn't quite approve of. "So this is the bride." Aurora extended her hand, her smile polite but firm. "Aurora Bennett, nice to meet you." Celeste didn't shake it, allowing Aurora's hand to hang awkwardly in the air. "Such courage," she said instead, sipping her champagne, her eyes narrowed. "To show up tonight after everything." Aurora smiled politely, refusing to be drawn into her game. "Takes less courage than you'd think. Just good heels." Celeste blinked, momentarily taken aback by her sharp retort. Damien's mouth twitched at the edge, a hint of amusement playing on his lips. "Just once," Celeste conceded, recovering quickly. I do hope you're not here only to be seen, she added, her tone saccharine sweet. This event raises funds for real causes. The last thing the foundation needs is another distraction. I'm here to support Damien, Aurora said, her voice calm and resolute. And to listen. Celeste repeated, her eyebrow arched skeptically. Aurora nodded, her gaze unwavering. People in PR know when to speak, and when to stay quiet long enough to understand a room. Celeste gave a tight, forced smile, her eyes betraying her displeasure. She drifted off, leaving behind the faint scent of roses and challenge, a subtle reminder of her power. Damien looked at Aurora, a hint of admiration in his eyes. You handled that well. She thinks I'm the weak link, Aurora said, stating the obvious. She wants you to be, he said, his voice firm. People like her, they scan for soft spots, they want something to poke, something to exploit. Aurora looked around at the eyes still watching her, assessing her, judging her, the elegant battlefield of status and power stretching out before her. And then, just before the orchestra struck up again, shattering the uneasy silence, a small, unexpected voice spoke behind her. Excuse me, are you the girl from the news? She turned, her heart pounding in her chest. An elderly woman in a floor-length velvet shawl stood holding a cane and a silver clutch shaped like a rose, her wrinkled face etched with kindness and curiosity. Aurora smiled, her nerves momentarily forgotten. That depends. Did the story make me look like a complete disaster? The woman chuckled, a warm, genuine sound. You looked human. That's rare in this room. She reached into her clutch and pulled out a small Polaroid camera, its retro design adding to her charm. Could I have a photo with you? She asked, her eyes twinkling. I like collecting moments that don't feel staged. Damien's brow arched in surprise, his gaze softening as he watched the exchange. Aurora smiled, touched by her genuine warmth. Of course. She bent slightly, allowing the woman to lean in, and with a click, the moment was captured. Flash. People watched, confused, amused, their carefully constructed facades momentarily crumbling. Thank you, the woman said, her voice filled with sincerity. My granddaughter's been having a hard time. I want her to see someone who stood up after falling down. Aurora swallowed the lump in her throat, deeply moved by her words. I hope she knows she's not alone. She will now, the woman said, shuffling off, her cane tapping softly on the marble floor. Damien said nothing at first, allowing the moment to linger. Then, a slow smile spread across his face. Not bad for your first gala scandal. Aurora smiled back at him, her heart feeling warmer, lighter. He reached for 2 flutes of champagne, handing her one, their fingers brushing. They clinked glasses, the sound delicate in the crowded room. To what? She asked, her eyes meeting his. He met her gaze, a hint of mischief dancing in his eyes. To being underestimated. She laughed, the first truly genuine laugh of the night. And it felt good, a release of pent-up tension, a celebration of her own resilience. But just as she took a sip of champagne, a new sound rose in the room, a collective intake of breath, gasps, murmurs, all turning toward one of the side entrances. Aurora followed the crowd's gaze, her heart sinking in her chest. There, stepping through the archway, with a gaggle of camera crews just behind him, wearing a borrowed tux that didn't quite fit and an apologetic smirk on his face, was Nathan, her ex-fiancé. Again, the moment Nathan walked into the ballroom, the temperature changed, the air thick with tension and anticipation. Aurora felt it in the shift of the crowd, the curious tilts of champagne glasses, the whispered hush that swept across jewel-toned gowns and tuxedo collars like wind through silk. He wasn't just a jilted ex-fiancé, a victim of circumstance. He was the one who ran, the one who chose to walk away. And now he was walking straight toward her, cameras catching his every step, a man who believed he still had the right to an explanation, to a second chance. Damien stiffened beside her, the subtle change in his posture a clear indication of his protective instinct. Aura? Nathan said when he reached them, his voice breathless, but trying to project an air of composure, as if he hadn't just crashed a high society event he wasn't invited to, as if this were just a casual encounter. Can we talk? She didn't answer right away, allowing the silence to stretch, to amplify the drama of the moment. She placed her mother's pearl-beaded clutch on the nearest table, the sound surprisingly loud in the hushed room. Carefully, deliberately, she created a pause that said, You don't get to rush me anymore. You don't get to dictate the terms. I think everything that needed to be said, Aurora replied, her voice calm but firm, was said the moment you walked away from the altar. Nathan's smile faltered, his carefully constructed facade beginning to crumble. Panicked. I said that, but this isn't you. All these cameras and pretending. Damien's voice was quiet, but sharp, cutting through Nathan's desperate plea. You mean showing up? Nathan's jaw clenched, his eyes flashing with anger. I'm not here to fight. Then why are you here? Aurora asked, her voice still calm, but laced with a chilling coldness. Because if it's for the drama, congratulations. You found it. She noticed Celeste watching from across the room, her eyes glee. Questions and whispers were sure to follow, Aurora knew. She gave a slow nod, a silent invitation for the storm to roll in. Let them come. That almost stopped Damon in his tracks. You weren't like this before? He observed, a hint of surprise coloring his tone. Before I got left standing at the altar? She retorted, a touch of wryness in her voice. He gave a single, understanding nod. She tilted her head, considering. Before I felt the desperate need to be liked, to be approved of. Now I just need to be okay, to be whole. He looked at her, a complicated expression on his face, as if he couldn't decide whether he wanted to admire this newfound strength, or shield her from the world. Perhaps it was both. With a gentle grace, Aurora reached up and unclasped her pearl drop earrings, the delicate pearls catching the light as she placed them in a small, white dish on the coffee table. It wasn't a rejection of a gift, but a letting go, a quiet exhale. I wore these, she murmured, her fingers lingering on the cool ceramic, thinking they'd somehow keep me from shattering, but I think I made it through tonight on my own 2 feet. You didn't have to, he said, his voice softer now, laced with a tenderness that made her breath catch. She looked up, her gaze meeting his. In that shared look, understanding flowed. Damon turned and walked toward the kitchen, the silence stretching between them, not heavy, but pregnant with unspoken words. I'm starving, The CEO needs to eat, he announced, injecting a note of levity into the air. He opened a cabinet with a sigh, clearly under duress. She followed him barefoot. The cool wood floors a welcome contrast against her skin. Do you have anything remotely edible? I'm not picky, just something. Emergency supplies, he replied, pulling down a forgotten box from the highest shelf. Crackers, some questionable jam, and, the last piece of blueberry pie that Elainer smuggled in 2 days ago. Bless Elainer and her culinary interventions. Damon handed her the pie tin with a fork, a wry smile playing on his lips. Don't judge me if I drink straight from the orange juice bottle. Desperate times, Aurora, desperate times. She perched on a counter stool, the fork feeling strangely heavy in her hand. I've seen you fire a man for improper typo spacing. You're allowed this. A little unrefined behavior won't hurt. He poured them each a glass of juice instead, pushing one towards her. For tonight, he said, raising his glass. For surviving, and for blueberry pie. They clinked juice glasses, the sound echoing in the otherwise quiet kitchen. Aurora took a bite of the pie and closed her eyes, savoring the burst of flavor. Oh my God, she breathed. This is criminally good. Elainer deserves a raise. I'll let her know she's been promoted to head of Crisis Pie, he quipped. She laughed, a softer, more genuine sound this time, letting herself lean back against the cool marble counter. For a moment, neither said anything, simply existing in the shared space, the quiet a balm to their frayed nerves. Then, quietly, Damon asked, tell me this is still temporary. Aurora's eyes snapped open. She set her fork down, the metal clinking softly against the tin. You want it to be? I'm supposed to, he replied, his voice low. Her heartbeat quickened, a flutter of something unfamiliar in her chest. And are you? He leaned against the opposite counter, bracing himself with his hands as if trying to steady himself. I planned this or most of it. I wrote the steps, predicted the fallout, even expected the photo ops. But I didn't plan you. Silence descended, thick and heavy with unspoken truths, with the weight of emotions neither of them had dared to voice out loud until now. Aurora stood, the stool scraping softly against the floor as she walked toward him slowly, deliberately. Her voice when she spoke didn't shake. I didn't expect you to hold my hand at the altar, or walk me out or stay. He didn't move, his gaze fixed on her. She reached up not to touch him, but to gently adjust the crooked edge of his collar, a small, intimate gesture that spoke volumes. This was supposed to be a lie, she whispered, her voice barely audible, but I've never felt more seen. His hand brushed against hers, a light, unintentional touch, but neither of them pulled away. I don't know what this is, she said, her eyes searching his. He nodded once, acknowledging the uncertainty. But it's not pretend. The air between them tightened, not with fear, but with a palpable sense of possibility. Aurora blinked, gently pulling back. I need time. He didn't argue. Take it. But as she turned to walk away, heading towards the guest room, her heels in hand, he called after her. His voice a low rumble that stopped her in her tracks. Aurora. She turned back, her heart pounding in her chest. Damon's voice was steady, resolute. Whatever this becomes, I'd never leave you at the altar. She didn't smile, but her eyes did, a spark of warmth igniting within their depths. On her way down the hall, she hesitated, then quietly slipped the earrings back on, the weight of them familiar and strangely comforting against her skin. Then, she disappeared into the hallway, leaving him standing alone in the kitchen, staring at the pearl earrings glinting softly in the dish, a silent testament to the night's unexpected turns. She washed off her makeup, shed the designer dress, and changed into the soft robe Elainer had thoughtfully left on the bed, letting the quiet of the night finally settle around her like a comforting blanket. The knock came just before noon, sharp and familiar. Aurora opened the door barefoot, still wearing a soft navy sweater over Damon's oversized lounge pants, borrowed that morning because, well, nothing else seemed to fit the moment quite like that quiet comfort. It was Clara. Her sister stood in the hallway, arms crossed, her coat half unbuttoned, her expression tight and unreadable. Surprised? Clara asked, her voice cool. Yeah, a little, Aurora admitted, stepping aside to allow her sister entry. Come in. Clara walked in like she owned the place, her movements purposeful and direct. She didn't bother to look around, didn't ask who else might be there. She simply made a beeline for the living room and stood in front of the coffee table, a formidable presence, like a woman about to deliver a devastating truth bomb. And Aurora knew that look all too well. Okay, Clara said, her voice leaving no room for argument. Start talking. Aurora blinked, taken aback by her sister's aggressive tone. Good to see you too, Clara. How was the drive? Clara raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow, unimpressed by Aurora's attempt at deflection. You're living in your boss's penthouse. You went viral in a pretend wedding turned real engagement, and now you're on the cover of Pulse magazine with a man you've never even mentioned dating. Ever. Aurora exhaled slowly, trying to gather her thoughts. She sat down on the edge of the sofa, feeling the weight of her sister's scrutiny. So you came all the way here to interrogate me? I thought you'd be proud. No, Clara replied, her voice softening slightly, but her gaze remaining unwavering. I came because I know you, Aurora, and you hate lies more than anyone I know. So tell me, what are you not saying? There was a beat of silence, the only sound the gentle hum of the city outside. Finally, Aurora ran a hand through her hair, the strands falling loosely around her face. It's not what you think. Oh, Clara said, tilting her head slightly, a flicker of curiosity in her eyes. Is it not a fake engagement? Aurora winced. Started that way. Clara's jaw dropped slightly, her carefully constructed composure cracking. Aurora, but it's not like that. Aurora interrupted, her voice rising in defense. It wasn't some publicity stunt. I got left, Clara, in front of everyone. Couldn't breathe. And then he stepped in. He didn't let me fall. Clara's voice softened, but her brows remained furrowed with concern. You could have just walked away, gone somewhere else. No one would have faulted you. I couldn't, Aurora said, standing and pacing now, her energy restless. I had reporters calling my office, clients pulling out. I would have lost everything. Damon offered to protect me, to shield me until the mess blew over. She stopped pacing, her gaze locking with her sister's. And now, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know where the performance ends. Silence descended again. Not angry, just heavy with unspoken emotions. Clara crossed her arms tighter, her expression a mixture of concern and frustration. I'm your sister Rora, she said, her voice firm. I don't care what the internet says. Care about you. I watched you dream about real love since we were kids. The kind with loyalty, softness, the kind mom and dad had. And now you're caught in a press package. It's not a package, Aurora said quietly, her voice laced with a hint of defiance. It's a man who showed up when no one else did. Clara's expression shifted, the doubt softening into something closer to fear. You like him, she said, stating it as a fact, not a question. Aurora didn't deny it. I see you, Aurora, Clara said, crossing her arms tighter as she studied her sister. You're softer around him but not smaller. Not anymore. You're stronger, Aurora. And that scares me because it means you're also more vulnerable. You care maybe more than you realize. She exhaled softly, her shoulders slumping slightly. You used to talk so loud when you believed in something. I haven't had much space to believe lately, Aurora said, almost a whisper. The words tinged with a vulnerability she rarely allowed herself to show. Clara walked over and sat beside her on the sofa, her movements gentle. They sat there shoulder to shoulder for a long time, the silence comfortable and companionable. Then, Clara picked up the small white dish on the table, the one with the pearl drop earrings resting inside. You wore these at the wedding, she said, her voice soft. Aurora nodded, her gaze fixed on the delicate pearls. I thought I needed them to feel like Mom was with me, a little piece of home. She would have lost her mind, Clara murmured, a faint smile playing on her lips. But then she would have laughed. She always said Hale looked like a villain in a romantic movie, Aurora said, a hint of amusement in her voice. Aurora laughed, startled, the sound echoing in the quiet room. She did. She said he had impeccable hair and emotional constipation. Clara added, her eyes twinkling with mischief. They burst into giggles, the laughter bubbling up from a place deep within them. A shared memory that transcended the present chaos. For a moment, the world fell away, and it was just two sisters clinging to the invisible thread of a woman who had shaped them both. Clara picked up one of the earrings, holding it up to the light, the delicate pearl gleaming softly. Aurora watched her, a sense of peace settling over her. Keep them, she said softly, her voice filled with sincerity. Clara blinked, surprised. No, they're yours. They're ours, Aurora said, her voice firm. Mom gave them to me for strength. I want you to have them next, for whatever storm comes next in your life. Clara pressed her lips together, fighting back tears. She placed the earring back in the dish gently, her hand lingering for a moment. I don't want you to settle, Rora, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Not even with someone who seems perfect on paper. I don't want perfect, Aurora said, her voice surprisingly strong. I want present. And Damien, Clara said, her eyes searching Aurora's. He's that. He listens. He stays. Even when you try to push him away. Clara stood, pulling her coat tighter around her. Then tell him that, Rora. Don't wait until he walks out thinking it was all part of the plan. Aurora nodded slowly, her heart heavy with a newfound understanding. I will. Just then, the front door clicked open, announcing someone's arrival. Damien entered, pausing when he saw Clara standing in the living room. Hello. Clara turned, offering a tight smile. You must be the emotionally constipated villain. His brow arched slightly, a hint of amusement in his eyes. I've been called worse. Aurora stifled a laugh, the tension in the room easing slightly. Clara grabbed her coat, ready to make her exit. I'll leave you two to your chaos. Rora, I'll talk to you soon. She turned to Aurora and kissed her cheek, her eyes filled with concern. Just promise me you'll be honest with him, and with yourself. I will, Aurora promised, her voice sincere. After Clara left, Damien set a folder down on the coffee table, his movements careful and deliberate. She's protective, he observed, his gaze meeting Aurora's. She's right, Aurora said, folding her arms across her chest, a defensive posture. We started this whole thing to survive a PR nightmare. Yes, Damien said carefully, his voice measured. So now I need to know something. Her voice didn't tremble this time, but a knot of anxiety tightened in her stomach. As Aurora stepped forward, closing the space between them, her gaze searching his. If this ended tomorrow, if no one cared anymore, would you still want to be with me? He looked at her, his expression unreadable, the silence stretching between them like a taut string. Not like a CEO assessing a business deal, not like a man caught in a strategic play, but like someone seeing a future, a possibility that both thrilled and terrified him. Yes, he said, his voice low and firm, breaking the tension in the room. But not because they're watching, Aurora, because you're worth staying for. Her breath caught in her throat, her heart pounding against her ribs. But before she could speak again, her phone buzzed, shattering the fragile intimacy of the moment. A message from an unknown number. She opened it, her fingers trembling slightly. The words on the screen seemed to leap out at her, cold and accusatory. Asterisk, I know the truth. How about the fake engagement? Let's see how the world feels about it next. Until now, it had only been gossip, a viral video, Callie's theatrics, whispers in the dark. But this was different. This was a threat, a promise of exposure, a calculated strike meant to destroy. Someone knew the truth behind closed doors, the secret they had so carefully guarded. She stared at the message, her face paling, the color draining from her cheeks. The reality of their situation crashed down on her, heavy and suffocating. Damien stepped closer, his eyes narrowed with concern. What is it? Without a word, Aurora turned the screen toward him, her hand shaking. And just like that, their truth was no longer just theirs. It was a weapon in someone else's hands, ready to be wielded against them. The message lingered on Aurora's phone like a ghost, a harbinger of the storm to come. Asterisk, I know the truth about the fake engagement. Let's see how the world feels about it next. Damien read it twice, his expression hardening with each pass. The subtle nuances of his reaction were not lost on her. His jaw tightened, a flicker of anger sparking in his eyes. His composure, so carefully cultivated, threatened to crumble. She saw it in his eyes, that crack in the armor, that flicker of history repeating itself. They'll spin it, he said at last, his voice low and dangerous. Twist it into something worse than it is. Aurora nodded, her heart sinking. But it was fake, Damon. In the beginning it was just to protect me. He turned to her, his gaze intense. But is it now, Aurora? Is it still just pretend? She didn't answer, not because she didn't know the answer, but because the answer had changed. Quietly, somewhere between the gala and this moment. Somewhere between shared laughter over blueberry pie and whispered truths on the balcony. Something real had taken root. Something that couldn't be denied. Damien walked to the windows, his back to her, his shoulders tense. His voice was quieter now, laced with a weariness that belied his strength. If this gets out, it won't just be a tabloid hit. My board will call it manipulation. The foundation will be dragged into it. Everything I've worked for. And me? She asked, her voice barely audible. You'll be called everything, he said flatly, his words devoid of emotion. Ambitious, opportunistic, desperate. Aurora let out a shaky breath, the familiar sting of prejudice pricking at her. Funny how people only use those words for women. That got the smallest flicker of a smile from him, a brief glimpse of the man beneath the CEO. She walked over and stood beside him, their reflections side by side in the glass, a mirror image of their intertwined lives. Then let's stop pretending, she said, her voice resolute. He turned to face her, his eyes searching her face. I'll tell them the truth, she continued, her voice gaining strength. The real story, all of it, but in my voice. Not every truth needs to be public, Damon, she whispered to herself, more than to him. Just the part that belongs to me, the truth that I can own. Damien studied her, his expression a mixture of admiration and concern. You're sure? There's no turning back. I'd rather risk the fallout than keep hiding something that's already become real, she said, her voice firm. I will no longer feel ashamed about my life. He was quiet for a long moment, his gaze locked on hers. Then he nodded once, a single, decisive movement. You'll need a platform. No, she said, shaking her head. I'll need a microphone. 3 hours later, Aurora stood in front of a modest press table in a small room with soft lighting and no handlers. Just her, a handful of journalists, and the truth. She wore a simple blouse, a gray wrap skirt, her hair loose and flowing, and the pearl drop earrings, back where they belonged, not as armor, but as a symbol of clarity and authenticity. She cleared her throat, the sound echoing in the hushed room. I know there's been speculation about my engagement, about the man who stood beside me when someone else walked away. The room leaned in, the journalists scribbling furiously in their notebooks, their eyes fixed on her. Aurora's voice didn't shake, though her heart was pounding in her chest. When Damon Hale offered to stand beside me that day, it wasn't a publicity stunt. It wasn't a corporate move. It was a moment of kindness from a man who didn't know me anything, but chose to help me preserve something I had nearly lost. My dignity. Flashes clicked, the cameras capturing her every move. No, she said, raising her hand slightly. No interruptions, please. Let me finish. We agreed to present ourselves as engaged to weather the scandal. That part is true. She paused, taking a deep breath. What no one predicted. She looked up, her gaze sweeping across the room. Is that something real would grow inside a lie meant to protect. She paused again, allowing her words to sink in. I'm not asking for forgiveness or applause. I'm not perfect. I was hurt, humiliated, and for a while I hid inside a fairy tale to survive. Her voice steadied even more, her gaze unwavering. But now, she said, her voice filled with conviction. Now, I'm not surviving. I'm living on my terms, with honesty. And yes, she added in the softest voice yet, I'm still with him. A stunned silence followed, broken only by the faint hum of the air conditioning. Then, scattered applause erupted. Not dramatic, not forced, just real, and that was enough. More than enough. That night, Aurora sat alone on the rooftop of Hale Tower, wrapped in a thick throw blanket, watching the stars twinkle between the skyscrapers. The city stretched out before her, a tapestry of light and shadow. She heard the door open behind her, the sound barely audible over the hum of the city. Damien's footsteps were quiet as he approached. He walked over, set a steaming cup of tea beside her, and sat down without saying a word, respecting her need for silence. Are you angry? She asked, her voice soft as she sipped the tea carefully. He shook his head, a faint smile playing on his lips. She couldn't hide her relief. Really? After all the image control? Really? He said, a genuine smile gracing his face this time. I've lived most of my life trying to control every word that gets said about me. But you spoke with nothing but truth. I respect that, more than you know. She looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. I thought I'd be afraid, terrified of being judged. But I wasn't. Because you meant it, he said, his voice low and understanding. I did, she said, her voice filled with conviction. Silence settled between them again, comfortable and companionable this time. A shared understanding that transcended words. She turned to him, her eyes sparkling with mischief. Everyone's asking the same thing now, she said. If the engagement was fake, what's real? He turned to her fully now, his gaze intense, his expression unreadable. You want to answer that? Not with a statement, she whispered, her voice laced with vulnerability. With a choice. Damien leaned closer, his hand reaching for hers. Then choose, Aurora. Choose now. Aurora set her tea aside, her hands trembling slightly. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, folded note, her heart pounding in her chest. He opened it carefully, his brow furrowed with anticipation. It read, simply, yes, if you're asking for real this time. He looked at her, his eyes searching hers, and there it was, the question he hadn't dared to ask out loud, the question that had been hanging between them for weeks, unspoken but ever present. But she'd already answered it. He reached into his coat pocket and opened a small velvet box, his hands shaking slightly. Inside, nestled on a bed of satin, was a simple gold band. Unadorned, elegant, timeless. 3 tiny pearls were set into the band. Elegant, quiet, honest. He offered it to her without performance, without fanfare, just with raw, unfiltered emotion. Aurora Bennett, will you choose me? Without pretending, without needing to be rescued. Just choose me. She laughed through tears, the sound filled with joy and relief. I already did. He slipped the ring on her finger, the gold warm against her skin. No applause, no flashbulbs, no staged perfection. just a gentle breeze, the glittering city lights, and the sound of two people finally catching up to their hearts. 6 months later, the cafe was small, quiet, tucked away between a bookstore and a flower shop, a haven of peace and tranquility in the heart of the city. Aurora stirred her tea, a contented smile playing on her lips, while Damien reviewed a menu he already knew by heart, his brow furrowed in concentration. She wore a cozy sweater, her hair pulled back in a loose bun, the pearl earrings dangling softly, now a part of her daily life, not a symbol of pain or pretense, but a reminder of her strength and resilience. Across the table, a little girl at the next booth pointed at them and whispered to her mom, her eyes wide with wonder. "That's the wedding lady." Aurora smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile that reached her eyes. Damien raised his mug, his eyes sparkling with affection. "To new stories, Mrs. Hale." "To the truth," she said, her voice soft but firm. They clinked mugs, the sound echoing in the small cafe. And outside the window, a small crowd of people passed by, unaware of the fairy tale that had once been written in the middle of heartbreak, and rewritten by choice into something far better than magic, something real and lasting. The wind moved softly through the trees that morning, carrying the faint scent of roses and earth. It was early, not yet noon, and the garden behind Aurora's father's house was bathed in a soft, golden light. There were no flowers arranged in towering arches, no towering cakes, no camera crews, no chandeliers, no string quartets, just simple folding chairs, wildflowers in mason jars, a white runner that curved gently beneath the trees, and at the end of it, Damien Hale in a slate gray suit, standing quietly with his hands clasped in front of him. He wasn't looking at the guests, the small gathering of friends and family who had come to witness their vows. He was looking down at the ground, as if calming his thoughts, or maybe just letting himself feel everything, every emotion, every hope, every fear that had led him to this moment. He had told her once, in a moment of raw honesty, "I'd never leave you at the altar," and here he was waiting. This time, the silence was not filled with whispers or tension, with doubt or fear. It was warm, expectant, sacred. A small group sat among the rows. Clara in a soft lavender dress, dabbing her eyes already, her father beside her, holding a handkerchief like he was pretending not to cry. Eleanor was there, too, smiling like a woman who knew everything before anyone else did. And a few close friends, that was all, because Aurora didn't need the world to see this. She just needed the people who stayed, the ones who had been there through it all. Then, the door opened, a simple wooden gate that led from the house to the garden. No dramatic music, no elaborate veil. Aurora stepped into the garden in a simple white dress, elegant and flowing. Her hair down, no tiara, just her mother's pearl drop earrings glinting in the light, a silent tribute to the woman who had shaped her into who she was today. In her hands, she held a single stem of gardenia, its fragrant petals symbolizing purity, love, and devotion. And as she walked slowly toward Damien, her steps slow and steady, her gaze fixed on him, everyone rose to their feet, a sea of smiling faces, but she didn't look at them. She only had eyes for him, and when their eyes met, Damien exhaled, a breath so quiet it was barely noticeable, but unmistakably full of emotion. A release of all the tension and uncertainty he had carried for so long. She reached the end of the path, and he stepped forward, holding out his hand, his expression filled with tenderness. Not trembling, not rushed, just steady and unwavering. She took it, her fingers interlacing with his, a silent promise of forever. The officiant, a quiet older woman with a kind voice and a silver pin at her collar, welcomed everyone, her voice gentle and soothing. "We're not here to witness perfection," she said, her gaze sweeping over the small gathering. "We're here to witness choice, two people choosing each other, fully and completely." And finally, Aurora's lips lifted slightly, a radiant smile gracing her face. She didn't need a speech, she didn't need spectacle, she didn't need a fairy tale. She just needed this. "I was left at the altar once," she said, turning to Damien, her voice clear and strong, filled with emotion. "But that day gave me something I never expected. It stripped away every illusion, every pretense, and left only the truth." She paused, her fingers tightening around his. "And in that silence you showed up. You didn't promise to fix me, you didn't ask me to hide, you just stood beside me." Her voice caught, tears welling in her eyes, but her gaze remained unwavering. "And now I want to stand beside you for everything. No pretending, no fear, just us." Damien's voice was low, clear, and real, his eyes shining with emotion. "I spent years learning how to build walls, how to control what the world saw. But you, Aurora, you saw right through that. You let me show up, not as the man people expect, but as the one who stays." He paused, his voice thick with emotion. "And I will, for you, every time." The vows weren't long, but no one forgot them. Every word was heartfelt, every promise sincere. When the moment came, the officiant nodded, her eyes filled with warmth. "Damien Hale, do you choose Aurora Bennett not because the world is watching, but because your heart is?" He looked at her, his expression filled with love and devotion. "I do. Aurora Bennett, do you choose Damien Hale not because he rescued you, but because you found your own strength and still want to share it with him?" She smiled, her eyes bright with tears. "I do." They exchanged rings, simple gold bands, no diamonds, no flash, just the kind of rings that felt real and honest on the hands of people who had fought for happiness. The officiant smiled, her voice filled with joy. "By the quiet power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife." Damien didn't wait for applause. He stepped forward and kissed her, his hand cupping her face gently. Slow, certain, reverent. Not a fairy tale kiss, but a real one that said, "I'm here, I stayed, I'm not going anywhere." And this time, when she stood before a crowd of people at the end of the aisle, it wasn't as a woman abandoned, but as a woman chosen, and more importantly, a woman who had chosen back. Afterward, the meal was served under a canopy of string lights, homemade dishes spread out on rustic wooden tables, toasts filled with gentle laughter and heartfelt words. Clara told the story of when Aurora tried to marry a teddy bear at age 6, her voice choked with emotion. Her father danced with her barefoot to a song her mother used to sing while cooking, the music filling the garden with a bittersweet melody. And as the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the gathering, Aurora sat on the porch steps, her head resting against Damien's shoulder, barefoot again, but no longer broken, no longer afraid. Damien kissed her temple, his touch gentle and loving. "You okay, Mrs. Hale?" She smiled, her heart overflowing with happiness. Better than okay. Then, she looked down at her left hand, the pearl earrings catching the last glint of light, and whispered, her voice filled with gratitude. This time, no one ran. This time we stayed. The end. What would you do if the man who once intimidated you became the one person who truly saw you? Tell me in the comments and rate the story from 0 to 10. If you enjoyed it, hit like, subscribe and don't miss the next emotional journey. Thanks for reading. See you in the next story.